All right, folks, it's getting colder outside, and we're going to take you to task with some vampires today. Thankfully, nights over here in Minnesota where we film the show only last one night. But today we're going to talk about Alaska and the interesting town of Barrow, which has 30 days of nights and a whole lot of murder.
In the early 2000s, a lot of the horror movies that were successful and really kicking out were coming from Asia. And one of the subgroups that was really successful here in America was comic books. And comic book horror, it's really blossomed in the early 2000s. This is one of them that blossomed and translated, I say, pretty well into movies. It's one of the best, probably, horror movies of the early 2000s American made. It's 30 Days of Night.
All right, everyone, welcome back to the show. I'm one of your hosts, Kyle Goethe from GoatFilmReviews.com.
I'm Nick from the St. Paul Filmcast, and today we're going to talk about one of the best, most successful comic book adaptations into movies, 30 Days of Night. It was written by Steve Nillis and Brad Templesmith. They collaborated together working on an offshoot of Todd McFarlane's Spawn, which is kind of like superhero horror, where they probably sat together and formulated this of, let's do our own horror comic book. And the success, it was a bestseller, it won a bunch of awards, and eventually, when that happens, you're going to get your movie.
Absolutely. And Steve Niles worked on the screenplay adaptation. In fact, funny story, they tried to make this into a comic book, and then they tried to make it into a film when that didn't work. And then they ended up getting someone from IDW to actually publish a comic book, which was then adapted into film. Stuart Beatty, who had gotten some success working on the Pirates of the Caribbean, Curse of the Black Pearl, came in to do some reworks and kind of like get the film into its standing. My favorite thing about this is that he has such a great concept. Just on the get-go, it's simple. It's almost like one of those things where you want to hit yourself over the head for not coming up with it because it's so easy, but at the same time, no one had done it yet.
The funny thing is they mentioned that in the movie, like, why have we ever done this years ago? But I agree with Kyle right there that the concept is far more beautiful than actually what is played out on the film. I do like the character, the vampires. Vampires are probably the best thing about this movie.
Yeah, there's a great creature design to them. The language they're speaking is a language created for the film using a linguistics professor. And I like that attention to detail where there's, there's a realism to it. They're not saying garbled words that are just unintelligible. There's an actual language that they're speaking in there. I'm sure, if you watched enough times, you probably figure out what it was. Big props to Danny Huston, who plays the lead vampire Marlowe.
Which we don't know a first name.
Yeah. Thank you, credits, for helping me there. But what's interesting about Huston is that he is known for his smarmy, slimy demeanor in a lot of films. He's not a likable person in most respects. I mean, he's played quite a few villains in his many films, especially in the comic book world. And what I like about him is that he's known for his kind of sly tongue and the way that he speaks with this smarmy, slimy attitude. He doesn't get to speak in the same way because he really only speaks this vampiric language. It's all physicality.
Right. And I like when you do your own vampire story, we'll come up with your own original concept. I mean, obviously people have rules for vampires, but here is completely new original concept of vampires. They're not, obviously they have some kind of a background to them because of the costuming, but here they're so monstrous. There's no really they lost all humanity to them. And I like that not only that they like the blood, but they almost wear it like a decoration, like an accessory.
That scene where Marlowe's running the blood through his kind of scalp region, kind of drawing lines, and it kind of reminded me of blood dreads almost, where they had a line running over his scalp,
Yeah, and I do like that. It's in the comic book as well, but it was almost an accessory. It's a part of their adornment. They wear it like a costuming and a decorative piece, and then it's almost like an addiction, where it's almost not in the inside but the outside, which is their driving force. Another point out is Ben Foster, one of the great actors. This is probably one of his shining performances.
I would call it a breakout.
But I would like to tell Ben, this is too good. This is just a horror movie. You don't have to be this phenomenal in this movie.
And it's sad because he is very much a supporting character. We don't really he gets some great scenes.
Yeah.
But he is not in the grand course of the film a lead in any way.
But I would just like to tell Ben,
yeah.
Ben, it's a horror movie, man. You don't have to do so phenomenal.
But I will gladly take him winning this horror film because I do think that he has the best scenes in the film. I think he's got a great voice work, which is not a Ben Foster voice. It's very much like even like guttural down to it. I love his kind of character-like references to Renfield and, like the familiar who just wants to be turned. Like, please turn me. I've earned this.
So it's very tortured,
And it's a great performance. I had only really remembered Ben Foster at that point from like X-Men: The Last Stand, and even that I didn't really remember he was even in that movie.
No, he
kind of exploded with this, and I agree he owns a lot of the trailers too. He's a great driving force.
I do like it's very the beginning of the movie where you have a lot of day and a lot of the exterior shots are phenomenal, especially for horror, but like for visually, it's very beautiful work. And I understand why they have to bookend it, which is because we're day and most of that is in at night. But some of the beginning of the movie is some awesome shot film.
Yeah, and when you know the title is 30 Days of Night, you kind of get the gist of it, like just from the title alone when you see a vampire on the cover. I like that it's bookended in that way because there's that ticking clock aspect to it. It reminded me of John Wick Chapter 3, where they like open the film and you're like, oh, in the next 20 minutes it's going to hit the fan. And you get that reminder as the time is slowly ticking, as the clock is going down. The film was shot actually mostly in the day, and they did day for night lighting, which is pretty successful, pretty well done.
That's one of them, if you didn't know movie making, it's one of the most successful things,
Yeah, it looks great though. And lighting for me is a big, if you don't light your darkness, then I will skewer you. One of my least favorite instances of this was Aliens versus Predator Requiem, which was this, the sequel to the Alien versus Predator movies. It's shot at darkness, and they had this great creature design, and then it's so dark you can't tell what's going on in any sequence. You can't even really enjoy the darkness. This is a film that uses darkness very well.
One of the things I have a tough time with this movie is I love the monsters of it, but you don't get enough of them. They're driving for the monsters. I don't really care for the human actors, the human characters in this movie. It doesn't really give. I actually care more about the characters in Mystery Alaska than I do about the characters in this movie.
It's because in Mystery Alaska you still have like they're almost soap opera-y in their ways, but they are fleshed out, I think, more likable. It's important, you can say that you don't always have to have likable characters, but they should at least be interesting. Like, we don't have to like Marlowe.
But I think he's fascinating. There's so much fascination to him.
Yeah, or like last episode when we talked about Network, Faye Dunaway, I don't like her character, but she's interesting. She's worth following. That's an issue that we have here is I don't know if the human characters are not likable or interesting enough to carry the film, with one exception. I love Mark Boone Jr. And I think he is fantastic. He
just looks like he fits in there.
And this is the second time battling vampires after John Carpenter's vampires. So he should be pretty good at it by now. But I like his character because he's the character to me that feels like he grows the most in the film. He doesn't like being around these other people. He moved out here, he says early on when he gets a ticket, I thought we moved out of here so we could have freedom. And then when he's thrust into the position where he needs to take up arms and help defend the others, he does it because he knows it's the right thing to do. Even if he doesn't want to, even if he doesn't think he's going to live the night, he does it. And I like him.
Yeah, so definitely you like to see the people, but you're anticipating what's the dread that's going to come to them from these villainous monsters in them. And you see all the monsters, and you don't get a lot of. I mean, obviously they're frightening character, but I want to see more of them, more of the. And obviously Danny Houston is going to leave, but you get a lot of interesting people that he's surrounded with that are far more. You want to find out what's more about them. Minnesota native Josh Hartnett is the carrier of this movie. This is kind of what I would say his peak.
I would say after this, like he just didn't stay in the central position, except for the great show Penny Dreadful that he was on. He didn't really maintain that career after that.
Yeah.
Because he had done Halloween H2O at this point. He'd done Pearl Harbor. He'd done an amazing movie called Lucky Number 11. He'd really carried his own at this point. He kind of just, didn't do as well. And I don't think that's a fault on him as a performer in the film. He's just not written very well.
No, and that's the other thing is this Evan Olsen, the sheriff of the county, and obviously you can see the inspiration for the comic book Walking Dead. I think they took a lot of lift from this movie into from 30 Days a Night. But yeah, the Evan Olsen character is just so empty. Yeah.
Part of me wonders if I haven't read the source material, but I was reading that the character was Inuit in the source material,
Yeah.
and I feel like in the translation and casting of the white actor, they may just have eliminated some of the things that made, like the Inuit character more interesting, more worth following,
Right.
than what we got on this film. I think they just kind of like pulled out all the interesting flavor that the character had and his connection to Alaska, his connection to what's going on. Kind of feels washed out.
Yeah, and then in the character's relationship with Melissa George's character, it's just obviously, I'm not convinced that there's something there. Where it's like a movie like Rocky, you can see there's something, entanglement with it,
Yeah, even when they're not emotional scenes, you get a hint of what's available.
But I just think, oh yeah, he's attractive and she's attractive. No one, and they're the only people talking. That's how I see it. They're the two most attractive people. Well, eventually they're going to hook up. Yeah.
Well, Mark Boone Jr.'s character spurned her advances, so she has to go to Joshua. I think second place isn't that bad. That for me. 30 Days of Night's biggest issue with its execution is that you have 30 days worth of story to tell. They have to run through it so fast in 120 minutes. I rarely say this, but I do think this source material would be better translated as a miniseries or like
let it breathe a little bit. Let us convince it. Let us really enjoy the town
and live in it. Get our character development. And we got so many human characters. We've got a good number of vampire characters that we don't get time to flesh them out because we're living with them for a month and we have to cover it really quick. And because you have to have the opening where we start getting dark and the night, through that time we have to run through it. It feels like a checklist at times.
And sometimes the scene choices, it looks like they want to make it almost like a comic book. They kind of lifts things like Ben Foster's speech when he's in jail. It's very comic booky, and that doesn't translate very well. I mean, it's obviously framed, he's standing still. But you draw it on a comic book, it gives the punch. But you do it on film, it just seems forced.
What's interesting about that is it does feel like they're trying to make a living comic book kind of visual. And it's some of it's kind of got that comic book meat to it, where it's unrealistic because you're larger than life. When you put things on a panel, I'm sure you're aware, you can be a little larger than life and it translates well, because I think you look at a comic panel, it's drawn, it's painted, it's not real. So you get to kind of live in that flavor. It reminds, when you think about a film like Sin City, they knew that they were doing something larger than life. Right. They embraced it.
You're right, yeah.
With 30 Days of Night, there's that sense of realism that
it just
doesn't translate.
It doesn't translate in. And that's the other thing. A lot of things seem forced. A lot of things, kind of what's going to emerge at the end. Obviously, you talk about a little town that's going to be terrorized by vampires. You see enough movies, you know what it's going to be.
You get what you're looking for. I just don't think you get enough of it.
Yes, right, yes.
Big strength for me, though, I did like David Slade's direction. I think David Slade, who burst on the scene with Hard Candy, did this film.
Movie. Fantastic movie.
Slade also did too, and I think we don't give him enough credit for this. He did, of the 5 not great Twilight films, he did the best one, Eclipse. We really need to celebrate that, because Eclipse, really I would say, is dare say watchable. So you have to remember that. I think David Slade too, what he has as a filmmaker is he has like a mean-spirited sense that other horror filmmakers like Alexandre Aja had, which is that it's okay to punish our characters. Yeah. And I think, and he almost pushes, and I know we see that in Hard Candy, he pushes that punishment as far as he can.
Yeah.
And I think those scenes, the really hard, painful scenes to watch in this film, are the ones that work the best, I think.
Yeah, a lot of these vampires obviously love foreplay to their victims. They like to just set up the mood and atmosphere and just torture the heck out of them. Not even physically, just psychologically and everything. Because they have time to do it. Yeah. No wonder Sam Raimi produced this.
Yes, and he was interested in directing, and I could see, again, Sam Raimi too. I would say that when he's not pushing for comedy, is a little mean-spirited with his horror. Yeah.
Bruce Campbell would.
Yeah. Bruce Campbell, Drag Me to Hell. Even some of the stuff he did in the Spider-Man films, he's comfortable punishing his characters. And I do think that, him and David Slade
probably sat down and talked. Yeah, we're going to do this together.
Absolutely, yeah. And what you point out with the vampire characters were they like their foreplay. I was thinking of this great quote from the great, cinematic character Eric Cartman, where he said, "These are appetizers. This is what you eat before you eat to make you more hungry." That was what I was thinking the vampires were going for the whole time.
Yeah, they're moving up the hierarchy because they have time to do it. And what are you going to do? How are you going to fight us? There's no garlic up here.
Until you get that shift where he's like, "It's too late for us to savor this." Like Marlowe's character says, in that thing, it's too late for us to savor this. We just have to hide our existence at this point. Like, we have to burn the town, get rid of this town so that nobody knows of our existence. We've spent centuries hiding. It's a great weird speech because it's inside of a dialect that we don't understand.
The other thing is the showdown. For me, it's a little more dated. It's so much what we've seen in the 2000s of the shaky cam and then the fast cuts that it just sometimes gets a little too much for me.
Mm-hmm.
As a slight criticism, but at the time that was the fashion.
Well, in this film too, which predates the Marvel Cinematic Universe by a year, we criticized some of the MCU films for having like a really solid, like, thought-provoking storyline up until the last 20 minutes, and then it kind of devolves into CGI. Another Danny Huston film, Wonder Woman, very criticized for that, and having a very grand and wonderful, like, 90%,
yes.
And then, hey, let's pop in that CG so we can just get our popcorn going.
Which I know this, but I'm sure it was in the producer's room of, we have to do this because we need this, and they always think that horror movies need a gigantic payoff. And then we talked about a lot of other movies that you think you need a gigantic payoff, where it doesn't necessarily.
Yeah,
true.
I was once told by somebody who preferred the second Crow film to the first one, because he said that it's okay because this film goes smaller. It's not afraid to go smaller with its, finale. And I was like, that's an interesting argument. I've never heard that before. But then the more I thought about it, bigger is not always better.
Yeah, and a lot of people always convinced, and a lot of people want to. I mean, you got a lot of pyrotechnics, and they want to work. So obviously there's probably the navigating of how to make a movie that gets played, but sometimes doesn't really give the delivery that we expect.
I get the need behind it. It just didn't work for me. Overall, I think the film does work. It's an enjoyable film.
It's one of those that it's on, I'll just put it on.
Yeah, it's not one that I think to myself, when we brought it up as a talking point, I was like, it's been a while. Like, it's probably been 10 years since I've seen it. But it's not an inherently bad film. It's just, there are certain things about it that should have worked better.
Yeah.
I do think it would work as a full-fledged out storyline. It definitely made me more interested to go back and read the comic book. And if we can say one great thing about it, it's
the concept.
So much better though than the horrible sequel that came out a couple years later. Man. My goodness.
Did you watch it?
I've seen it twice.
Okay.
It's not good. It's not good at all. So if there's one thing I can tell you, if you're interested in checking out this film, I will say go watch 30 Days of Night.
Yeah.
Please stop after 30 Days of Night, though. You owe it to yourself. Mental health is important. Take care of yourself and don't watch Dark Days. So that's my thought process on it. What do you think? Do you recommend it still?
Yeah, it's a great. I mean, it's a horror movie, but it's definitely you can. It's a popcorn horror movie that you enjoy, and of course the human characters. I'm not invested with them. Let's see them get punished. Let's enjoy the bad guys. That's pretty much the concept of the movie. Is nice. Yeah.
Yeah, and when you say that, I agree. Like, we don't care about these human characters, and the argument is occasionally like things like the Friday the 13th movies, Nightmare on Elm Street movies, that they're just cannon fodder. Let's just get them hacked up and watch them go down. I would enjoy a lot more of those characters from the Friday the 13th sequels than I enjoyed these ones, and I think like that's really where you get the most enjoyment, is just watching them be destroyed. And that we're human, so that's
it's not Shakespeare, people. It's just a fun horror movie to enjoy.
Yeah. So definitely wins in the film Ben Foster, wins in the film Danny Huston, wins in the film, I think, the visual style of the whole thing. Faults definitely being on the screenplay.
And the ending for me.
The ending and some of our human characters just in general are just, let's lop some heads. But hey, those are our thoughts in the film. Have you seen 30 Days of Night? We want to hear your thoughts on it as well.
Since we're almost in it,
yeah, definitely. If you've read the book too, we'd love to hear what you think about how it was translated. That's not something that I've really gotten a chance to dive into. So leave your comments down below and let us know what you thought. And hey, we always appreciate you guys watching us. What we appreciate even more is dropping a like right on down there. It takes just a second or two, and you wouldn't believe how much it helps this channel in the algorithms. It really helps boost us and get that message out there more. If you want to get more of our message twice a week,
Join the Patreon.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Join the Patreon, patreon.com/Kyle and Nick. Drop a subscribe down there so you can be a part of us every single time we drop a new episode, because we love bringing this content to you. As always, guys, I'm Kyle Goethe from GoFilmReviews.com.
I'm Nick Palodichuk from the St. Paul Filmcast, and maybe you want to leave the light on.